Everybody wants to know which diet wins, low carb or low fat. And people want to argue about this like the fate of civilization depends on whether breakfast includes bacon or oatmeal. One side says carbs are the villain. The other side says fat is the villain. Meanwhile, ultra-processed food is in the background robbing both houses. Now a huge new study comes out. Almost 200,000 people. More than 30 years of follow-up. And the headline sounds almost rebellious. Maybe it's not really about low carb versus low fat. Maybe it's about food quality. And when I saw that, I thought, okay, this is worth talking about because I still lean low carb. I still think low carb, keto, and carnivore can be the most powerful tools we have, especially for insulin resistance, obesity, high triglycerides, low HDL, fatty liver, type 2 diabetes, and the kind of hunger that makes your refrigerator feel like it has magnetic powers. But I also think we need to be fair. We need perspective. And if a study gives us a chance to become wiser instead of just louder, we should take it. So today, I want to do 3 things. First, break down what this new research actually found. Second, explain why it does not overturn the low-carb argument. And third, show you why I still lean low-carb mechanistically, while still respecting the role of a clean, low-fat, whole food diet. Because in the end, the real enemy may not just be carbs or fat. It may be fake food wearing a health costume. Now first, let's keep it honest. The study is observational research. That means it can show associations, but it cannot prove cause and effect the way randomized controlled trials can. And that matters because observational studies are useful. They can generate ideas. They can reveal patterns. They can make us ask better questions. But they should not be the final word when making clinical decisions. So this paper is interesting. It is helpful. It adds perspective. But it does not erase what randomized trials have already shown us about low-carb diets and metabolic health. This is important because some people will read a headline and act like low-carb just got escorted out of the building by security. No, that is not what happened. What this study actually did was compare healthy and unhealthy versions of both low-carb and low-fat diets. And that is where things get interesting, because 2 people can say they eat low-carb, while one is eating eggs, salmon, steak, avocado, olive oil, and non-starchy vegetables, and the other is eating processed meat, low-carb candy, fake brownies, and keto snack bars that taste like regret. Same label, different biology. And the same thing happens with low fat. One person is eating beans, vegetables, fruit, intact grains, and real food. The other is living on fat-free cookies, sugary yogurt, cereal, and frozen so-called healthy meals with a label that smiles while your pancreas cries. Again, same label, different outcome. And that was the key finding. Healthy, low-carb patterns were associated with lower cardiovascular risk. Healthy, low-fat patterns were also associated with lower cardiovascular risk. Unhealthy versions of both were associated with worse outcomes. So what does that tell us? Simple. You cannot rescue junk food by changing the macros. Junk food with fewer carbs is still junk. Junk food with less fat is still junk. You can't sprinkle wellness dust on processed food and expect your metabolisms to stand up and applaud. So to that point, I agree with the paper. Whole food matters. Quality matters a lot. But now let's talk about what this study does not mean. It does not mean carbs no longer matter. It does not mean fat is irrelevant. And it definitely does not mean all diets work equally well for all people. Because once you move beyond headlines and actually think mechanistically, low carb still has a very strong case, especially for the insulin-resistant patient. And let's be honest, that is not a small group. That is a massive group. When someone is insulin resistant, they often do not tolerate carbohydrate well. More carbs can mean more glucose exposure, more insulin demand, more fatty liver production, more triglyceride production, more blood sugar swings, more hunger, more cravings, more fat storage, more metabolic chaos. That is one of the main reasons I still lean low carb, because low carb addresses that physiology more directly. It reduces the incoming glucose burden. It often reduces insulin demand. It often lowers triglycerides. It often raises HDL. It often improves blood sugar control. And maybe one of the most underrated benefits of all, it often turns down food noise. That matters because weight loss is not just a math problem. It's a hormonal, neurological, behavioral, and metabolic problem. And if someone is constantly hungry, constantly thinking about food, and constantly crashing after meals, good luck winning that battle long-term with willpower and positive affirmations. That is why randomized trials matter so much here. Because when you look at those trials, low-carb repeatedly performed very well on metabolic markers. In many studies, low-carb does as well or better for weight loss. I'll pin some of those studies in the comments. But most importantly, it often produces bigger improvements in triglycerides and HDL. And those are not cosmetic changes. Those are meaningful cardiometabolic signals. So yes, I respect the observational paper, but I still give greater weight to randomized controlled trial data when it comes to actual clinical decisions. And when I do that, low carb still looks very compelling. Now let's talk about lipids, because this is where people start acting like they're either auditioning for a courtroom drama or a conspiracy documentary. Some people hear that LDL can go up on low carb and immediately panic. Others hear that LDL can go up and say, who cares? LDL is meaningless. I'm not in either camp. I'm in the camp called, let's use our brains. Yes, LDL cholesterol can rise on low carb in some people. That is real. But that is not the whole story, because when you look deeper, low-carb diets often improve the quality of the LDL pattern. You often see fewer small, dense LDL particles and a shift toward larger, more buoyant LDL particles. That matters because small, dense LDL is generally considered more atherogenic. It is more closely tied to insulin resistance, high triglycerides, low HDL pattern that we worry about so much. In other words, low-carb diet can sometimes raise LDL-C in certain individuals, but still improve the overall pattern in a more favorable direction. And that is one reason I do not like when people reduce the entire conversation to one number. You have to look at the pattern. What happened to triglycerides? What happened to HDL? What happened to glucose? What happened to insulin? What happened to waist circumference? What happened to particle profile? That is how grown-up medicine works. Now let me mention ApoB2, because this is important. ApoB matters because it reflects the number of atherogenic particles, and I do not think we should ignore it. We should watch it. But again, context matters. Low carb often improves the overall atherogenic dyslipidemia pattern. Triglycerides come down, HDL rises, small dense LDL often improves, and in many people, ApoB can improve as the metabolic picture improves. So my point is not that low carb gives every person a perfect lipid profile. My point is that low carb often improves the broader cardiovascular risk pattern in a very meaningful way, especially in insulin-resistant people. That is why I still lean in that direction. Not because I'm emotionally attached to bacon, not because I want to join Team Ribeye and wave a steak in the air, but because mechanistically, low carb often makes more sense for the modern metabolically sick patient. Now, does that mean low fat has no value? Of course not. If someone is eating a whole food, low fat diet, real food, minimum junk, lots of nutrients, less sugar, less ultra processed nonsense, they can absolutely improve health. And this paper reinforces that. If you clean up the food environment, both approaches can look better. That should not surprise us. When you stop eating industrially engineered food products and start eating actual food, your body often says, finally, I thought you forgot I was human. So where do I land? Here's my honest take. If a person is lean, insulin sensitive, active, metabolically healthy, and thriving on a whole food, low-fat diet, I respect that. But if a person has obesity, insulin resistance, fatty liver, high triglycerides, low HDL, type 2 diabetes, stubborn hunger, or a food noise that won't shut up, I still think a clean, whole food, low-carb approach often has the stronger mechanistic edge because it addresses the root problem more directly. It lowers the glucose load. It lowers insulin demand. It improves triglycerides. It improves HDL. It often improves particle quality. And it often makes appetite control easier in the real world, where people live surrounded by snack traps and stress. So no, this new study does not prove low fat is better, and it does not disprove low carb. What it really does is remind us of something important. Quality changes everything. A healthy low-carb diet is not the same as an unhealthy low-carb diet. A healthy low-fat diet is not the same as an unhealthy low-fat diet. And observational research should make us curious, not careless. So here is the big takeaway. Eat real food. Respect the fact that observational data is weaker than randomized trial data. And if you are insulin resistant, overweight, diabetic, pre-diabetic, high triglyceride, low HDL, fatty liver, or constantly hungry, do not let one observational paper talk you out of considering a whole food low-carb approach. Because when you look at mechanisms and when you look at the better clinical trial data, low-carb still has a very strong argument. And that is exactly why I lean that way. Not blindly, not dogmatically, but biologically. Because your body does not care what diatribe you join online. It cares what you feed it every day. And in a world full of ultra-processed confusion, marketing nonsense, and nutrition arguments that never seem to die, choosing real food may be the smartest move of all. And if you want more videos that help you fix the root cause of obesity, insulin resistance, diabetes, and metabolic dysfunction, check the description and the playlist below, because that is where the real healing conversation continues.